Seattle at Baltimore. Your Ravens. What do you make of this one this week?
Yeah, this is the game which it feels hard to ignore in some ways because it's not only does it feature so many of the players who we love for fantasy football, your Mark Andrews, Lamar, DK Metcalf, Kenneth Walker, but there's also a lot of really interesting stuff going on here. Last week, we saw Zach Charbonnet have perhaps his most involvement that we've seen. We saw Pete Carroll come out this week and he was so effusive about Zach Charbonnet. He talked about how he just knows ball, how he gets it, how everything he does is great. So that's going to be really interesting to see how his involvement goes this week, whether Kenneth Walker loses any touches, because Kenneth Walker hasn't been doing anything wrong. We're also seeing Jackson Smith and Jigba being slightly more consistently involved. I believe it's back-to-back weeks where we've got 2 touchdowns from him now. And that is an area where if you were going to pick on the Ravens, the slot is somewhere where they have given up points at times. So that's possible. But this Ravens defense is looking absolutely fantastic in terms of in DVOA. They're first on defense across the league and 4th on offense. So there aren't too many holes you can poke in what the Ravens are doing. The biggest problem for them seems to be their ability to just shoot themselves in the foot. For me and for Rory, I know who's in the chat and watching, when you're a Ravens fan and you're watching the games, there have been so many points where Lamar seems to be trying to force the ball to Odell Beckham. These plays where Odell's on the outside or, they're going for that back corner sort of fade in the end zone, and it just isn't there. But Lamar seems desperate to get him involved, desperate to get him a touchdown, and perhaps that'll break right this weekend. I mean, the Seahawks allow the 8th most fantasy points to wide receivers. They allow the 3rd most to slot wide receivers. The wide receiver on the Ravens who's consistently been in the slot the most has been Nelson Aguilar when he's been on the field. But last week he played a lot less than he had been doing. We're big fans of talking about the squeaky wheel narrative on this show, and Lamar came out with an absolute squeaker of a wheel yesterday, talking about how he definitely wants to get Bateman going. He really wants to get him more targets. Bateman, for his part, he talked yesterday to reporters about how he felt like he's slowly getting back to his old self. It's easy to forget that he had Lisfranc surgery, which isn't something easy to recover from. So, yeah, there's lots of ways you could attack this. The Ravens, they start fast. They've outscored opponents by 49 points in the first quarter, which is a league high. They get down to the red zone and they tend to be quite efficient there, apart from the game against the Steelers where everything was dropped. So I think if I'm stacking this game, I'll probably lean towards the Lamar Andrews side with one of the Seattle wide receivers coming back. It's just tricky because as much as DK Metcalf is seeing good volume and seeing good red zone opportunities, still the wide receiver 27, Lockett's the wide receiver 30, neither of them quite what we expect so far. And the Ravens will have the 5th lowest wide receiver catch rate. But if we're expecting the Ravens to push them, then we have to expect at least one of the Seahawks wide receivers to be able to get there.
Yeah, I think you mentioned DK Metcalf there. He is a player that is consistently underperforming his volume. You look at any sort of metric. I run an in-season wide receiver model, and he's one of the guys that stands out of he's getting the volume, he's getting the high-value targets. I mean, the red zone usage is there. He's just underperforming it at the moment, and that could see massive regression at any point. And I think generally it probably will do. And he's the kind of player that could blow up and have a really nice little stretch of games. It's interesting you're talking about those 2nd and 3rd wide receivers in this Baltimore offense. I think watching the film, Bateman looks better than I've ever seen him for the Ravens over the last 2 weeks. And as a player as someone that's been very in on Bateman over the last 2 years, I've kind of reticent to put it into the ether and talk it into real. But watching the game, he looks smoother. He looks more agile. And I think that, as you said, maybe it is that he's just getting healthy. But yeah, I'm very excited by what I've seen the last 2 weeks, but I'm also conscious I've been burned a lot over the last few years. So maybe I need to cool the jets a little bit.
Yeah, and the Ravens need that deep threat that we saw from Bateman last year against the Jets. And I forget, it was in Miami where he also broke another one. Because they're one of only 2 teams in the league to have not scored a touchdown from outside the red zone. The only other one is the Falcons, and the Ravens shouldn't be in any sort of category with the Falcons offensively. And it just feels like, Zay Flowers, he was getting used a bit further downfield. Then once Odell Beckham and Rashad Bateman were back out there, now he's kind of gone to that lower A dot sort of role again. And if you're going to do that, that's fine. But to create space for Flowers when he gets the ball, you need somebody opening the top up at the back end of things. So it'd be great to see Bateman get a couple of deep shots. And I think, the Seahawks safeties and secondaries, they're a good group. They're definitely not an easy team to pick apart, but yeah, I think there's plenty of reason for optimism that we'll get a good game out of this one.